We were at the doctor's office for routine tests. The nurse smiled at me and said, "Congratulations, Dad." But I had been away the entire month my fiancée got pregnant. When I agreed to come with Mira to the clinic, I thought it was going to be nothing more than a quick routine check. She had told me a few days earlier that she wasn't feeling well, and her family physician suggested she get some blood work done. I had been back home for just over 2 weeks after a month-long project out of state, and I figured maybe the stress had worn her down. I didn't expect much. In fact, I was half planning to grab us coffee afterwards. The waiting room was quiet, and Mira kept squeezing my hand, which I thought was odd. She was usually calm, never fidgety. When the nurse, Nora, called us in, she smiled warmly and said, "Congratulations, Dad." It stopped me dead. At first I thought she had mistaken us for someone else, maybe a couple already pregnant. But Mira didn't flinch. She smiled faintly, almost rehearsed, and followed Nora in. I trailed behind, my chest tightening. Inside, the doctor greeted us, shuffled through papers, and began speaking in that calm, detached tone doctors use when delivering information they assume will be received with joy. "You're about 2 weeks pregnant," he said, glancing at Mira, then at me. "Everything looks normal." 2 weeks. My brain immediately did the math. I had been away for a solid month. No trips home, no surprise weekends, nothing. If she was 2 weeks pregnant, that meant conception happened after I returned. That timeline was possible. I relaxed slightly, though something about Myra's stiff posture unsettled me. But then, I caught a flicker in the doctor's expression when I asked a simple question. "Are you sure about the 2 weeks?" He hesitated. Myra's eyes darted to him, just for a second. A silent signal. And then, in the most unnatural way, he cleared his throat and said, "Actually, I might have misspoken. It's closer to 5 weeks. 5 weeks. That crushed me like a hammer. 5 weeks meant conception happened while I was gone. Out of state. Hundreds of miles away. I felt heat rising in my face. The kind that comes when your entire body rejects what it's hearing. I couldn't hold it in. I asked how he could confuse 2 weeks and 5 weeks. That's not a rounding error. That's a completely different category. My voice rose, and Nora peeked in from the hallway, sensing tension. The doctor tried to calm me, explaining that early pregnancy dates are often estimated, that hormone levels vary, that it was nothing exact. But his eyes weren't steady. He avoided looking at me directly. Mira touched my arm, whispering that everything was fine, that stress could throw off calculations. She said I was overreacting, embarrassing her. I stared at her, seeing beads of sweat form along her hairline. She wasn't nervous because of my reaction. She was nervous because she was caught in a trap she had set for herself. On the drive home, silence smothered the car. I replayed the scene over and over. 2 weeks, then 5. The same doctor, the same test results, but a sudden switch in narrative. Who benefits from that? Only her. And the look, how she looked at him before he changed his answer. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened my work calendar and cross-checked the days. I had left on the 2nd of the month. I had been away until the 29th. Conception at 5 weeks lined up almost exactly with the middle of that absence. There was no way, but I wasn't ready to explode yet. I needed more than suspicion. The next morning, Mira acted as though nothing had happened. She hummed while making coffee, scrolled on her phone, and even showed me a baby clothing ad as if to normalize the idea that we were expecting. I nodded, said little, and pretended to go along. But my head was burning. I started with simple things. When she left her purse on the counter, I glanced inside. Receipts. One from a cafe I had never been to, dated exactly 2 weeks into my trip. Another from a pharmacy late at night, time-stamped at nearly midnight. She had told me she was staying with her sister that week. Why would she be at a pharmacy that late if she was at her sister's? I tucked the receipts back, careful not to leave a trace. Later that day, I asked her casually about that week. She repeated the story about her sister, almost word for word, like a script she'd memorized. And then, something small but unforgettable. When I asked her what the doctor had meant by 2 weeks versus 5, she snapped too quickly. She said, "He was confused, but I cleared it up before you embarrassed us both." Cleared it up. It sounded like she wasn't correcting him after the fact, but before. The following week, I returned to the clinic alone, pretending I needed paperwork for insurance. The receptionist printed me a summary. But something strange caught my eye. A note scribbled in the margin of Myra's file in a different pen. Reviewed timeline with patient. 5 weeks. Final. Final. It looked deliberate, not clinical. Almost as if it had been adjusted after a conversation. On my way out, I saw the doctor in the parking lot. He recognized me, nodded, and tried to walk quickly to his car. I stopped him and asked again, pressing harder about the timeline. His polite mask slipped. He stammered, saying early pregnancies were difficult to date, that I shouldn't worry. But when I asked why he had first said 2 weeks, His face went pale. He muttered that maybe he looked at the wrong line in the chart. Wrong line. But there were no other lines. I left, my mind reeling. I was now convinced Mira had leaned on him, pressured him somehow to adjust the date. Maybe she was close to his family. Maybe she had confided in him. Maybe she had cried and begged. Whatever it was, I knew I had just seen the cracks in a conspiracy. I began keeping a quiet record of everything. Times she left the house. Places she claimed she was going. Small details, like the mileage on her car when she returned from errands. She said she was buying groceries, but the odometer suggested she'd driven miles beyond the supermarket. I also noticed a shift in how she treated me. Overly sweet one day, cold and defensive the next. She hovered near my phone, almost as if she was afraid I would look something up. She never left hers unattended anymore. At night, when she fell asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The thoughts circled endlessly. Who was the father? Was it someone I knew? Someone close? Or just a stranger who had slipped into my life without me noticing? 2 weeks after the clinic visit, she told me her family wanted to celebrate the good news. I agreed, masking my dread. At the dinner, her parents beamed. Her mother hugged me tightly, and her father clapped my back, calling me son. I forced a smile, but I couldn't stop watching Mira. She avoided my eyes the entire night, deflecting attention, making jokes too loudly, trying to drown out her own conscience. Then, as dessert was served, her mother mentioned something that chilled me. We're just so relieved the doctor confirmed everything so clearly for you both. It must make you feel secure. Confirmed everything so clearly. That wasn't something her mother would just assume. Mira must have told her family that the doctor had settled my doubts, erased any suspicion. She was writing the narrative in advance, painting me as the supportive, unquestioning partner. But I wasn't. I was quietly assembling the truth. After that dinner with Myra's family, I realized I was up against more than just a lie. It wasn't just her. Her parents, the doctor, even the nurse. They had all been nudged into playing parts in the story she wanted me to believe. If I confronted her again now, she'd just double down, maybe even paint me as paranoid to everyone else. So I decided I needed to build a case quietly, piece by piece. Not to prove anything to her, but to myself. Because if what I suspected was true, there would come a time when I needed undeniable proof. The first trail I followed was financial. Mira had never been careless with money, but she wasn't meticulous either. She often left her online banking app open on her laptop. While she was in the shower one morning, I opened it. The usual charges were there: groceries, gas, utilities. But mixed among them were oddities. A charge at a boutique cafe across town, time-stamped at noon on a Wednesday, when she had told me she was working late. Another charge at a hotel bar, small enough to be drinks for two. There were rideshare charges too, places she had no reason to be. Each one on its own could be explained. Together, they formed a pattern. I took screenshots, sent them to my email, and deleted the traces. My hands were shaking as I did it, partly from adrenaline, partly from disgust. The second trail was her car. Myra's routine was predictable: gym in the mornings, work during the day, groceries in the evenings. But one Thursday, she told me she'd be home by 8. When she pulled into the driveway, it was almost 10. After she went to bed, I slipped into the garage and noted the odometer. The trip to her office and back should have added about 20 miles. Instead, it was nearly 60. Where had she gone? I started keeping a log in a notebook I had inside an old tool case. Dates, odometer readings, explanations she gave. The math never lined up. The third trail was her phone. Mira had grown oddly protective of it. She took it with her even to the bathroom, slept with it under her pillow, and silenced notifications when I was around. One night, after she drifted into a deep sleep, I carefully slid it out from under her hand. Face ID didn't work on me, but her cloud backup did. I knew her password, and when I logged into her account from my laptop, I found fragments of deleted conversations. Not the full texts, but metadata, numbers, times, durations. One number appeared over and over. Short calls, long calls, sometimes late into the night while I was away. I copied it down and looked it up. It wasn't saved in her contacts, but a quick search revealed it was linked to a membership at a local gym. The name associated with it was Owen. The name didn't mean anything to me, but the pattern was obvious. Mira had been in contact with him throughout my absence, and the calls had only increased since then. I didn't bring it up. Instead, I watched her more carefully. The first time I saw him was by accident. I had left work early one Friday and decided to swing by the supermarket. Mira had said she'd be shopping that evening. Her car was there, parked near the entrance. As I grabbed a cart, I saw her inside through the sliding doors. But she wasn't alone. A tall man in a dark jacket was leaning close to her, laughing at something she said. She touched his arm lightly, the way she used to touch mine when she wanted to keep me close. They moved quickly through the aisles, not shopping so much as killing time. I stayed back, pretending to browse magazines. At one point, she looked around nervously, almost as if she felt me watching. Then she smiled up at him and whispered something that made him grin. I left without buying anything. That night, when she came home with 2 bags of groceries, I asked how her day had been. She said it was long, boring, nothing special. She didn't mention the man. Later, I checked the receipts in the bags. Basic items, nothing unusual. But the timestamp showed she had checked out 20 minutes after I saw her in the store. 20 minutes, unaccounted for. The next escalation came from the clinic itself. I hadn't told Mira I went back to the doctor for paperwork, but I suspected she guessed. Her demeanor changed, tighter smiles, clipped responses. One night, while folding laundry, she said out of nowhere, "You don't need to keep worrying about the doctor's slip-up. He clarified everything. Let it go." The way she phrased it struck me. He clarified everything. Almost like she had rehearsed the line. But if she was confident enough to say that, it meant she had spoken to him again, and probably reminded him to stay consistent if I returned. I wondered what she had said to him. Had she cried? Pleaded? Threatened? The man had risked his medical credibility to alter a timeline for her. Nobody does that for nothing. I decided to press further. On a rainy Tuesday night, I followed her. She told me she was going to meet her sister for dinner. I waited 10 minutes, then drove the same route at a distance. She didn't go to her sister's apartment. She drove across town, parked outside a small pharmacy, and stayed in her car. After a few minutes, a familiar dark jacket slipped into the passenger seat. They sat there for nearly half an hour. At one point, his hand reached for hers on the dashboard. When he finally left, she drove not to her sister's, but straight home. I stayed parked across the street, my grip on the steering wheel so tight I thought I might snap it. The pieces were aligning, but I needed more. The next day, I called the number linked to the gym membership. A man's voice answered. Calm, casual. I didn't speak. I just listened to the background noise. Music, weights clanking, voices calling encouragement. It was a gym. He really did exist, wasn't just a wrong number or business contact. I hung up before he asked who I was. I began testing Mira with small lies. One night, I said I had to work late, but stayed in a cafe across the street from our building. An hour later, I saw her step outside, glance both ways, and walk quickly toward the corner. The same dark-jacketed man was waiting in a car. She slipped inside, and they drove off. I didn't follow. Not yet. It was enough to know she had taken the bait. Meanwhile, the doctor hovered in my mind like an accomplice. If Owen was the father, then Mira must have confided in the doctor when she realized she was pregnant. She must have begged him to alter the dates so I would believe it was mine. The thought made me sick. Not only was she betraying me, but she was weaponizing professionals to cover it up. The more I uncovered, the clearer her strategy became. She was building an alibi from all angles. Family convinced. Doctor persuaded. Me gaslit. If I confronted her without airtight proof, she'd twist it, call me insecure, maybe even unstable. So I kept watching, gathering, waiting. One night, as I sifted through the screenshots of her bank statements, I noticed something new. 2 hotel charges within the same week. Both small, both late at night. One matched the night I saw her at the pharmacy with him. She had used her debit card for those. Not even careful enough to hide it. I cross-checked the addresses. Both were for different hotels in the same district near the gym. That was when my suspicions hardened into certainty. This wasn't a fling. It was a pattern, an ongoing relationship. But the real jolt came a week later. I came home early from work, walking up the stairwell because the elevator was out. As I reached our floor, I heard Myra's laugh echoing down the hall. It wasn't her usual laugh. It was lighter, freer, the kind of laugh she hadn't shared with me in months. I slowed, listening. Another voice joined hers. Male, low, teasing. They were standing at the door to our apartment. When I rounded the corner, Owen was there, handing her something small, maybe a note or receipt. Their hands lingered too long. When they saw me, Myra's smile froze. Owen muttered a quick goodbye and walked briskly down the hall, not looking back. Mira scrambled to cover, saying he was just a neighbor she bumped into. But the way her cheeks flushed, the way her eyes darted, told me everything. I had enough to convince myself, but I needed enough to corner her. Mira was too good at weaving stories, too good at crying on command and turning herself into the victim. If I pushed too soon, she'd twist it into paranoia, and I'd be the one apologizing. That had happened before in smaller arguments. This time, I wanted her trapped with no way out. The plan came to me while staring at the notebook of evidence. Receipts, odometer readings, screenshots. None of it would matter if she could brush it off as coincidence. I needed to catch her in real time. So one Thursday morning, I told her I had to travel again for work. A 2-day trip out of town. I even packed a bag and left it by the door. She pretended to be disappointed, kissed me on the cheek, and told me to be safe. Her tone was too light, too quick, as if she couldn't wait for me to leave. At noon, I drove out of the city just far enough to sell the lie. Then I doubled back and rented a room at a motel on the edge of town. From there, I waited. That night, I parked down the street from our building, hidden by shadows. Hours passed. Then, just before 11, I saw her car pull in. She got out, checked her phone, and stood by the curb. A familiar dark jacket approached. Owen. He didn't hesitate. He kissed her quickly, like it was routine. They both slipped inside. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, every muscle begging me to storm in. But not yet. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them thinking they were safe. An hour later, the lights in the apartment dimmed. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. Miss you. Can't wait for you to come home. I stared at it, all rising in my throat. She was in bed with another man, texting me at the same time. I snapped photos of the car parked outside, timestamped them, and added them to my growing file. The next morning, I didn't go home. Instead, I went back to the clinic. I asked to speak with the doctor privately. He was reluctant, but when I pressed, he let me in. I shut the door and laid everything out. The first slip about 2 weeks, the sudden correction to 5, the scribbled final note in Myra's file. His composure cracked instantly. He looked older, weighed down. Finally, he admitted it. Mira had come to him crying, terrified I'd leave if the timeline didn't match. She begged him to say 5 weeks. He claimed he hadn't altered medical truth, only phrased it with flexibility. But that was nonsense, and he knew it. I asked him if he could live with destroying someone's life to cover another's lie. He didn't answer. His silence was confirmation enough. I walked out knowing I was right. That evening, I set the final piece of the trap. I texted Mira that my trip had been extended and I'd be back late the next night. Then I sat in my motel room, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the hours to crawl by. At 9, I drove to our street again. And there it was, Owen's car. Same spot, same time. This time, I didn't wait. I went straight up the stairs and unlocked the door as quietly as I could. Voices drifted from the bedroom. Her laugh, his lower murmur. I pushed the door open. They were tangled in the sheets, Myra's head on his chest. Her eyes went wide, her face drained of color. Owen shot up, cursing under his breath, scrambling for clothes. Mira started talking immediately, too fast, too desperate. She said I was supposed to be out of town, that it wasn't what it looked like, that I was making a mistake. The words spilled out like water from a broken pipe. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I opened my phone, scrolled through the photos, receipts, and logs, and laid them out on the dresser. Every charge, every odometer reading, every photo of Owen's car. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Finally, she broke down. She admitted it hadn't been a fling. It had been going on for months. She said she didn't know how to stop, that she thought she could manage both lives. Owen tried to defend her, saying it wasn't planned, that they had just fallen into it. His voice shook. He looked less like a confident lover and more like a man who knew his world was about to collapse. The final twist came when I asked Mira directly about the pregnancy. Her eyes flicked to Owen. That tiny, involuntary movement told me everything. I pressed harder, asking if she had told Owen. She shook her head violently, saying he didn't know, that she had been hoping it could pass as mine. Owen's face twisted in shock. He turned to her, demanding answers, his voice rising. I stepped back, letting them turn on each other. The room spun with accusations. She said she hadn't wanted to lose me. He said she had lied to him too. She said she was scared. He said he should have walked away. I stood there, silent, letting them unravel. When it was over, Mira collapsed onto the bed, sobbing. Owen stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I didn't chase him. He wasn't my concern. I told Mira I knew everything, from the doctor's altered story to the hotel charges. I told her there was nothing left to say. Then I left. Down on the street, Owen's car was still parked. He sat inside, staring at the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. When he saw me, he looked away. I walked past him without a word. By the time I got back to the motel, my phone was full of missed calls and frantic messages from Mira. Promises to explain, pleas for forgiveness, claims that it had meant nothing. But I had seen enough. I had the truth. And soon, I would make sure everyone else saw it too. I didn't go home that night. I didn't even answer her calls. Instead, I stayed at the motel and stared at the ceiling until dawn. My phone buzzed nonstop, messages from Mira alternating between fury and despair. One moment she was begging me to come back. The next she was accusing me of betrayal for setting her up. Each word was proof of how far she was willing to twist the truth. By the time the sun rose, I had decided. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to break down. I was going to expose her lies with precision, the same way she had tried to cover them up. The first step was her family. I arranged to meet her parents later that day, telling them I had urgent news. They welcomed me in, warm as always, still convinced they were about to become grandparents with me in the picture. Mira wasn't there. I didn't waste time. I laid out the receipts, the screenshots, the mileage logs. I showed them the time-stamped photos of Owen's car parked outside our home while I was supposedly out of town. At first, they shook their heads, unwilling to believe. But then I told them about the doctor. How Mira had persuaded him to shift the pregnancy timeline from 2 weeks to 5. Her mother's face crumpled. Her father swore under his breath. The evidence was too much to dismiss. She told us the doctor clarified everything. Her mother whispered, her voice breaking. He did, I said. But not because of medical accuracy. Because she asked him to. There was no anger in me anymore. Just cold certainty. That evening, Mira came home to find her parents waiting for her in the living room. I wasn't there, but she later sent me a storm of texts. She wrote that her parents had turned on her, that I had poisoned them, that I had ruined her life. She was right about one thing. Her world was unraveling. The second step was Owen's partner. I had found her contact information weeks earlier, tucked away in the gym's member directory. At the time, I hadn't been ready to use it. Now I was. I sent her everything. The screenshots, the receipts, the timeline. Her reply came within minutes, short and sharp. Thank you. I knew something was off. 2 hours later, Owen showed up at the motel, pounding on the door. He looked wrecked, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot. He said I had destroyed his life, that his partner had kicked him out. I told him he had done that himself. He shouted, but it was hollow. Eventually he left, muttering curses into the night. One more bridge burned. The third step was the truth Mira could never escape. DNA. I didn't wait until the baby was born. I found a private lab that could run a prenatal test using Myra's blood. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth every cent. Convincing her to agree wasn't difficult. I told her calmly that if she wanted any chance of rebuilding trust, we needed certainty. She resisted at first, saying it was invasive, saying it wasn't necessary. But when I said I wouldn't stay without proof, she caved. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. 0% probability of paternity. The numbers were cold, precise, impossible to manipulate. The child wasn't mine. I stared at the report for a long time, then tucked it into the same folder that held everything else. The case was closed. When I showed Mira the results, she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. She tried to spin it again, saying the test could be wrong, saying we could raise the child together anyway. She said she loved me, that mistakes didn't define a person. But her tears didn't move me. Not anymore. I told her it was over. Not just the engagement, not just the relationship. Everything. I was done being her shield, her alibi, her insurance. She screamed then, not words, just raw sound. As I walked out the door for the last time, she hurled something across the room. I didn't look back. The aftermath spread quickly. Her parents, humiliated, withdrew their support. They still loved her, but the disappointment was too heavy. The dream of a perfect wedding, of a stable future, had been shattered. They no longer looked at me with warmth, but with sorrow for what their daughter had done. Owen's relationship ended in public fashion. His partner shared the evidence with friends, family, even coworkers. His reputation at the gym collapsed. Members whispered, clients left. He became a cautionary tale. As for the doctor, word got out. I didn't have to say much. A complaint reached the medical board. He was investigated for professional misconduct, and though I don't know if he lost his license, his name was tarnished. Every patient who once trusted him now looked twice. And Mira? She carried the pregnancy to term, but the glow of excitement was gone. The father wasn't there. Her family support was fractured. The life she thought she could juggle fell apart in her hands. For me, the months that followed were both heavy and freeing. I moved into a small apartment across town. I focused on work, on friends, on rebuilding routines without suspicion hanging over me. Some nights the memories clawed back, the nurse's smile, the doctor's slip, Myra's trembling hands. But each time, I reminded myself, I had uncovered the truth. I hadn't let her bury me under lies. People often ask if I regret it. If I regret digging, if I regret setting the trap, if I regret the cold way I exposed her. The answer is simple. No. Lies rot from the inside, and I wasn't going to let them rot me too. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.